Hey everyone! Tonight we're diving into the ridiculously stressful existence of an Egyptian pharaoh. From forced sibling marriages to being personally responsible for sunrise to constantly suspecting your wine might be poison. Before you settle in, take a sec to like this video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy my content. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and your local time. It's fascinating seeing our global audience. Now, dim those lights, maybe turn on a fan for some ambient noise, and let's begin tonight's journey together. Imagine being born into the most powerful position on Earth and already failing at it. While normal babies get to cry, burp, and make messes, you're being wrapped in ceremonial linens, inspected by priests, and declared the living embodiment of Horus, god of kingship. You're not just an infant, you're a political earthquake. Your birth comes with celestial signs, stars are studied, sacred cows may or may not moo in your honor. Somewhere, a bald guy wearing excessive eyeliner is already carving your name into stone tablets you'll never read. From your first breath, everyone's panicking, not because you're fragile, but because you're the next living deity. A single cough could trigger a national crisis. Childhood, forget about it. No toys, just ceremonial scepters you're forbidden to chew on. No lullabies, just hymns about you chanted by elderly priests who smell like incense and existential dread. Your crib? Probably a gold-plated icebox colder than the Nile in February. Your caretaker's sole job: prevent you from dying, disappointing the gods, or doing anything undignified like crawling. Your bottle-fed political expectations. Your first words are likely scripted. If you try playing with cousins, someone whispers, "He's fourth in line. Keep an eye on him." Before you can walk, you're being groomed to rule. Advisors are already planning your education, public image, and probably your future spouse. Spoiler, she'll share your last name and jawline. And let's not forget, you're raised believing you're divine. Not metaphorically. You're expected to genuinely internalize that the sun rises because of you. Adorable until you realize the entire kingdom will blame you if it doesn't. Think being a living god means skipping school or feeding ducks by the Nile. Think again. As a pharaoh in training, your schedule would make modern CEOs look unemployed. Your day starts before dawn, stars still visible, priests already chanting. No gentle nanny wakes you, just a steward holding a golden tablet listing today's responsibilities, naps not included. First lesson, hieroglyphics. These aren't normal letters, but tiny drawings of birds, eyes and upside-down bread loaves that somehow form government policies. Mess up one doodle, and you've accidentally condemned someone to eternal suffering. Then comes religious instruction, quizzes on God's sacred names, proper cucumber blessings, and how many blinks are acceptable during offerings. Slip up and priests glare like you sneezed on RA himself. Math isn't for taxes, but monument building. Geometry lessons aren't fun, but practical, because someday someone will ask how to stack 2.3 million limestone blocks into a perfect pyramid without creating the world's first leaning tower. Public speaking? Crucial. You'll address crowds who think your words control the weather. No winging it when a wrong phrase could crash grain prices. Military strategy comes next. You're 10, never thrown a rock in anger, but expected to know battlefield formations, river crossing tactics, and how to casually smite the Nubians in conversation. Philosophy? Nope. You learn to maintain Ma'at, sacred cosmic balance. Sounds poetic until you realize it means ensuring crops grow, criminals behave, and nobody insults the gods during flood season. All this happens under tutors who are equal parts teachers, spies, and walking anxiety attacks. By day's end, your brain's stuffed with symbols, schedules, sacred laws, and just enough political paranoia for sleepless nights. Normal childhood friendships? Not for you. Your playmates are political variables. That cheerful boy racing you through palace gardens? High priest's son, the kid who always wins at board games? General's nephew, the girl you actually like talking to? Already betrothed to your cousin for dynastic stability. You're not surrounded by friends, but by titles and bloodlines with nervous parents. Everyone acts nice because their careers depend on your favor, not friendship, but networking. Even your tutors report on your behavior. Show independence? Good but threatening. Question rituals? Heresy. Ask why your cousin stares during lunch. Alarming. Definitely going in the records. Privacy doesn't exist. Can't sneak off because fun is suspicious. Disappear for 10 minutes and palace guards mobilize. The divine can't wander like a farmer's goat. Show favoritism. Disaster. Invite one child to play and 3 others send angry pictogram letters. Compliment a noble's daughter and suddenly rumors spread you've chosen your queen at age 9. Solution? Become guarded, politically neutral. Master fake laughter and compliment ugly tunics. Make every friendship seem equal because slighted families might conspire over breakfast. This is the royal version of no new friends. Not by choice, but because any could grow up to be your assassin, rival, or brother-in-law. Now you're not just a prince, but officially divine. Not royal divine, but actual God-on-earth divine. Priests confirm it. Scrolls declare it. People bow like you invented sunlight. Sounds impressive until you realize nobody asked if you wanted this pressure. Every sneeze becomes a divine message. Every step ritualized. Every mistake carefully explained so the gods don't seem clumsy. But here's the catch. While everyone calls you Horus on earth, you still stub toes, get pimples, and suffer fig-induced stomachaches. Divine yet digestively challenged. The contradiction is staggering. Taught you're all-powerful, but can't leave palace without 5 guards, 3 priests, and a chariot procession. Supposedly control Nile floods, but trip over a cat, and people whisper about omens. Expected to maintain cosmic balance, but personally blamed for droughts, riots, or disappointing harvests. And the rituals, endless exhausting rituals. Special divine phrases, sanctified food, ceremonies where you theatrically defeat evil while sweating in linen tunics. Privately you might doubt or feel bored, but can't say so because admitting, "I'm not sure I'm a god," causes theological meltdowns or gets you replaced by a more confident cousin. So you smile, bless statues, wave from balconies, and wonder how many past gods secretly hated this job. Truth is, being God wasn't liberating, but a full-time performance with eternal consequences. Expected to be perfect and mystical even when you just want to eat a pomegranate in peace. Nobody warns you the higher they place you, the lonelier it gets atop Mount Divine expectation. So puberty hits like a runaway chariot. Your voice cracks, your body changes, and just when things couldn't get more awkward, your advisors slither in with a scroll and a smirk announcing, "Time to pick a wife. Oh, and by the way, your sister would be perfect." Yes, your actual sister. Welcome to Royal Matchmaking, Egyptian Dynasty Edition, where keeping the bloodline pure, read, genetically questionable, means marrying your aunt, half-sister, or cousin are all perfectly acceptable options according to palace politics and exactly 0 genetic counselors. Romance? Irrelevant. Personal preference? Not part of the ceremony. This is about optics. You're divine, she's divine, and nothing screams divine legitimacy like holding hands at your wedding with someone who shared your wet nurse. Meanwhile, the palace buzzes like a kicked beehive. Court officials debate which relative is least related like it's some cosmic riddle. Priests practically drool at keeping the bloodline heavenly. Servants place bets. You're just trying to pretend this is normal while realizing it's not just about marriage. It's about producing heirs. Fast. You're barely sprouting chin fuzz, yet there's already pressure to manufacture a mini pharaoh. No pressure, kid. Just an entire civilization counting on your awkward teenage hormones to deliver a suitably godlike heir, who may or may not end up with 3 elbows. And through all this, you're expected to remain calm, ceremonial, and composed because you're not just a husband. You're a walking symbol of cosmic order, fertility, and divine power. Especially during rituals where you're paraded with your new bride, who, reminder, might also be your niece. In private, you might feel disgust, confusion, or the overwhelming urge to sprint into the desert and scream into a sand dune. But showing any of that would make you look unstable. So you nod, smile, attend the banquet, marry your sister, and convince yourself it's for Egypt's greater good. Because what's a little inbreeding when the fate of civilization depends on you producing an heir who's sufficiently God-adjacent? Congratulations, you've survived royal puberty, sponsored by genetics, politics, and sheer denial. And the only thing more twisted than your family tree is pretending this is all completely divine. Finally, coronation day arrives. Time to bask in glory, right? Wrong. First, they glue a fake beard to your chin with beeswax and strap a live cobra to your forehead. Voila! You now resemble an anxious statue with back problems. Let's discuss the crown situation. This isn't some lightweight fashion accessory. It's a multi-layered monstrosity of leather, linen, and sometimes actual metal that feels like balancing two helmets and a potted plant on your skull. The double crown combines Lower Egypt's red crown with Upper Egypt's white crown, symbolizing you rule everything. Beautiful in theory, terrible for your cervical vertebrae. You'll stand for hours under the blazing sun while priests chant about the universe depending on your posture, all while sweat rivers flow down your back. Then come the ceremonial outfits. Long white kilts that cling in ungodly places, leopard skin sashes that itch like crazy, golden breastplates that don't breathe, and sandals that are basically papyrus flip-flops offering zero arch support. Every outfit choice carries cosmic implications. Wrong color? Might offend a god. Wrong hemline? Could accidentally summon a famine. No pressure. You're just part of a centuries-old fashion statement designed for deities, not comfort. Your throne may be gold, but it's definitely not ergonomic. And the only thing heavier than the crown on your head is the expectation that you'll wear it like you enjoy it. As Pharaoh, you get unlimited power with unlimited blame, worshipped as a living god. Sure, but the moment anything goes wrong, the entire kingdom stares at you like you personally unplugged the Nile. Too much rain? Clearly Pharaoh's unbalanced. Not enough rain? Gods must be punishing Pharaoh. Crops fail? Your fault. Someone stubs their toe on a temple step? Probably because you sneezed wrong during last Tuesday's ritual. Your head of state, head of religion, and head cosmic maintenance crew. Sun doesn't rise properly? People don't assume bad weather. They assume you forgot to pray hard enough. You've got one job: keep the universe running smoothly. Problem is, you've got no idea how to actually do that, and divine status means you can't admit ignorance. I don't know why there's a frog plague isn't an acceptable response. You either pretend you've got a plan or invent rituals on the spot, acting like you meant to do it all along. Even your dreams aren't private property. Have a nightmare? Court astrologers gather, scribble furiously, and probably declare you need to build a new temple immediately to protect Egypt from your subconscious. Headache? National omen. Oversleep? Scribes note it as potential apocalyptic imbalance. Sneeze too much? A goat gets sacrificed just in case. When things really go south, famine, uprising, plague, crocodile incidents, people don't say, wow, nature's unpredictable. They say Pharaoh must be weak, or worse. Maybe the gods want a new Pharaoh. So you parade around draped in gold, surrounded by incense and bodyguards, secretly wondering if citizens are building statues or digging your tomb. Your role isn't just ruling. It's absorbing blame for every mosquito bite, muddy riverbank, or undercooked goose. Because when you're divine, there's no such thing as accidents, just divine mistakes waiting to happen. Being Pharaoh means mornings that start before dawn, not with a gentle nudge, but with ritual chants, burning incense, and heavily perfumed priests silently judging your posture. Normal people get coffee. You get purified with water from a sacred pool that's colder than the afterlife. Then comes the royal dressing ritual, not for fun, but because your linen must be blessed, pre-folded, and probably ironed with moonlight or something equally ridiculous. You're barely awake, but already wearing 30 layers and a falcon-shaped chest plate. Next begins the endless ceremonial cycle, entering temples where priests unroll scrolls longer than crocodiles. You must perform sacred gestures perfectly. Hand here, nod there, smirk at that statue, chant this god's name you haven't thought about since childhood. Messing up isn't an option. One wrong syllable, and suddenly you're being blamed for the Nile drying up, cattle dying, or the moon looking insufficiently divine. Everything must be flawless to maintain Ma'at, the sacred cosmic balance that apparently hinges on your ability to wave incense correctly. These rituals aren't quick either. Some ceremonies take hours, during which you can't yawn, slouch, or ask, "Do we really need to rub sacred oil on all 43 statues today?" This isn't just religion. It's national theater, with priests performing, scribes recording, and onlookers nodding in solemn approval while you stand stiffly, pretending you don't have a cramp in your god leg. All this happens before you do any actual ruling. So yes, you're Egypt's most powerful person, but your mornings are dictated by astrology, bird omens, and ceremonial checklists that make tax forms look exciting. By sunrise, you're already exhausted, with 12 more rituals, 3 public appearances, and 1 carefully rehearsed divine smile still to go. As pharaoh, you're the most powerful figure in the kingdom, which means every single person around you is either pretending to adore you or secretly calculating how to replace you. Your guards? Loyal, until someone offers enough gold or spiritual favors. Your advisors? Always smiling, always nodding, always accidentally mentioning how popular your cousin is with the military. Even your cupbearer looks suspiciously enthusiastic about serving your drinks, like he's trying really hard to prove they're not poisoned. Let's not forget your delightful extended family, a tangled web of half-brothers, uncles, and at least 3 guys named Ramses who definitely want your sandals. These aren't relatives, they're throne applicants. Every hallway conversation could be an ambush. Every banquet might be your last supper. You can't relax in your own palace without wondering if that decorative cobra on your chair is decorative enough. The paranoia is justified. Assassination attempts are basically Egypt's national sport. If you die suddenly, they'll call it a divine mystery, which really means someone got creative with date wine and scorpion venom. So you develop habits, food tasters, rotating servants, changing routines randomly. Not because it helps much, but because making betrayal slightly inconvenient is better than nothing. Sleep? Good luck. You rest in a guarded chamber with triple locked doors, a ceremonial dagger under your pillow, and a guard you only half trust standing watch, probably practicing his best "I didn't do it" face. But the most exhausting part isn't avoiding death, it's pretending you don't know it's coming. You must stay calm, divine, and unbothered, because showing fear means weakness, and weakness means opportunity. Every glance, handshake, or well-timed compliment could be part of someone's rise to power. And if you trust the wrong person, well, at least you won't have to worry about politics anymore. Being pharaoh isn't about ruling. It's about surviving in a golden cage where everyone who bows by day might be sharpening knives by night. Public life as pharaoh is one endless performance. You're expected to be divine, wise, photogenic in 40 degrees Celsius heat while wearing 20 pounds of gold, and capable of smiling like you're not about to pass out. Those long processions through packed streets? Half the crowd loves you, a quarter fears you, and the rest just came for free bread. You stand in chariots waving like a deity on parade while secretly wondering if fainting counts as a bad omen. The outfits don't help. Elaborate robes that stick where linen shouldn't, jewelry that doesn't breathe, and those decorative sandals offering all the support of wet papyrus. You'll stand through hours of rituals, blessing sacred cows, cutting ribbons with golden knives, naturally, accepting offerings you don't want from nobles you don't trust, all while smiling, nodding, and occasionally muttering, "May the gods bless you," as you slowly die inside. The sun doesn't care you're a god. It beats down like divine judgment. Your makeup runs, incense chokes you, and every eye watches for imperfections. Look tired? Pharaoh is weak. Seem annoyed? The heavens tremble. Miss one ceremonial goose blessing, and suddenly people whisper about droughts. Even festivals, which sound fun, are just more work. Banquets where you can't eat, dances where you can't move, religious plays where you portray yourself, without any lines. It's not celebration. It's theater where you're the lead actor every single time. You return to the palace drenched in sweat and divinity, wondering how many more statues need blessing before the gods grant you a nap. Being pharaoh in public means constantly pretending you're having a spiritually profound experience while slowly roasting like a ceremonial duck on display. Behind the glittering facade of pharaonic power stands an even stronger force, the priests. Temples aren't just for praying. They're banks, farms, schools, libraries, tax offices, and possibly ancient data centers. The priesthood controls grain, land, gold, public opinion, and metaphysical guilt. So while you wear the crown, they hold the ledger books. Every temple is a kingdom within your kingdom, its high priest the CEO. These aren't harmless old men humming hymns. They're political tacticians in robes, fluent in astrology, accounting, and subtle blackmail. They manage gods, festivals, omens, and crucially, your public image. Sneeze on a feast day, they'll interpret it as divine disapproval. Wear the wrong color sash, suddenly Ra's, sad, and barley riots start. Yet you must work with them. Without priests, your divinity vanishes overnight. One new prophecy, carved on a temple wall, and poof, the gods have chosen someone else. Worse, temples are tax-exempt, hoarding wealth with holy immunity while your treasury struggles unless you start wars or shake down merchants. The priests have golden jackal statues with better retirement plans than your generals. The worst part? They pretend to serve you. We live only to uphold your divine will, they say, while quietly diverting resources, managing spies, and advising your enemies to try prayer and also treason. You're the figurehead. They're the committee deciding how godly you're allowed to be this week. Cross them and the nation rebels. Obey them and you become their mascot. It's a power struggle perfumed with incense and passive aggression. The gods may live in heaven, but their accountants definitely live at Karnak. Family drama takes on new meaning when you're pharaoh. Forget forgotten birthdays. In your family, drama means palace coups, conspiracies, and the occasional accidental crocodile pit incident. Your biggest threat isn't foreign armies, it's your own bloodline. You grew up surrounded by siblings, cousins, and uncles who all believe they should be sitting on your throne. Some are ambitious, some delusional, all dangerous. Succession? A nightmare. Egypt doesn't do primogeniture. It's more whoever survives the most assassination attempts and gets priestly approval wins. Half the court schemes about which son might succeed you, while the other half ensures it's not the wrong one. Your children become racehorses, each with factions, tutors, spies, and mothers whispering bedtime stories about how the gods always choose the handsomest heir. Subtle. Meanwhile, brothers and uncles aren't content being background characters. Each has generals on speed dial and an unsettling familiarity with accidental staircase tumbles. Then there are the queens, plural, multiple wives sharing one roof, forming alliances and rivalries with chessmaster precision. Glance wrong at one, and suddenly the kitchen staff is retiring, your wine taster. Palace life is a beautiful, perfumed cage where everyone is either family or future usurper. Funerals? Oh, the drama. Every death becomes suspicious. Every illness a potential poisoning. Every cough sparks temple gossip. Even your own burial isn't safe. Tombs get looted, names erased, and your loyal son might finish your pyramid then immediately start carving over your legacy because he wants a bigger one. Being pharaoh means the people who know you best are also those who most want you removed. Permanently. Politely. It's a royal forest full of snakes. After a lifetime of rituals, paranoia, heat stroke, and family backstabbing, you finally die. Surely you've earned rest? Nope. In Egypt, death doesn't mean retirement. It means becoming a full-time spiritual symbol and part-time museum exhibit. The embalming starts immediately. Your organs are removed, weighed, and politely stuffed into canopic jars, each guarded by animal-headed deities like some post-mortem Pokemon team. Your brain gets pulled through your nose with a hook, not because it's useless, but because tradition says so. Then you're stuffed with resin-soaked linens and natron salts until resembling a sacred raisin in fancy bandages, a political relic wrapped tighter than palace tax scrolls. Next comes the coffin, or rather coffins. You're nested in increasingly ornate boxes like some divine matryoshka doll, each covered in gold leaf and protective spells against rude ghosts. But the real showstopper? Your tomb. You've spent half your life and half Egypt's GDP building a mausoleum screaming immortality. Walls covered in instructions, prayers, and awkward drawings of you smiting enemies who definitely won't bother you in the afterlife. Unfortunately, your tomb also screams, "Rob me." Despite curses, guards, and architectural tricks, most pharaohs' tombs get looted within decades, sometimes hours, of sealing. So while priests chant about your eternal spirit, thieves are sprinting off with your gold-plated footrest. The ultimate insult? If your name gets forgotten, your tomb defaced, or your mummy ends up in a museum gift shop 3,000 years later, you don't get an afterlife at all. One bureaucratic oversight, and you're haunting archaeologists forever. You might have been king in life, but in death you're museum bait, political currency, or a cautionary tale carved in limestone. And you haven't even reached the judgment hall yet. For someone marketed as a divine being, you sure spend a lot of time in mortal danger. Being pharaoh wasn't just about building temples and posing for statues. No, it also meant personally leading armies into battle. Grab your war chariot, strap on a bronze sword, and go smite some foreigners before breakfast. Your generals made the plans, the scribes wrote the propaganda, but you had to show up and pretend you weren't terrified. Divine authority only worked if people saw you physically leading the charge. Even if you had absolutely no idea how to hold a spear without looking like you were trying to pick up laundry. Forget hiding in a tent like some medieval king. You were expected to ride at the front, waving a ceremonial axe while shouting something profound like, "The gods will crush you," all while secretly hoping the enemy didn't have better archers this year. Even successful battles required theatrical flair. You couldn't just win quietly. You had to return with prisoners, loot, and enough severed hands to impress the temple accountants. Everything would be paraded through the streets while you smiled, trying to look both humble and terrifying simultaneously. Lose the battle, though. That's a catastrophe. Get injured, humiliated, or God's forbid, run away. The priests might interpret it as divine displeasure, or worse, an excuse to replace you with someone who hasn't been cursed by defeat. So now you're stuck in an exhausting cycle. Raise taxes to fund wars, fight wars to protect your image, then build monuments exaggerating the wars in case anyone noticed you nearly died. It's expensive, exhausting, and terrible for your blood pressure. The kicker? Even if you didn't want to fight, you often had no choice. Generals demanded it, advisors insisted, the gods sent dreams, or maybe the priests just ran out of things to do and declared it smiting season again. You weren't just pharaoh. You were the marketing department for national military ambition. Fail to win. Hope they bury you fast, because history isn't kind to divine warriors who come home empty-handed. After all the rituals, warfare, backstabbing siblings, and linen-wrapped paranoia, you'd think history would at least give you a standing ovation. But no, the final insult of being pharaoh was this. Your legacy was entirely out of your hands. You could commission the grandest temples, carve your name on every obelisk, and bury yourself beneath a mountain of gold. But all it took was one jealous successor with a chisel, and poof, you never existed. Name erased, statues defaced, achievements reassigned to your great-nephew who ruled for 6 minutes and declared himself son of the sun and also super cool. This name erasing wasn't just pettiness, it was spiritual murder. In ancient Egypt, if no one spoke your name, your soul couldn't reach the afterlife. So you weren't just forgotten. You were trapped in cosmic limbo because your great-grandson wanted your pyramid budget. Even if they didn't erase you, they might rewrite you entirely. Suddenly, your disastrous battle becomes a glorious victory. Your mild-mannered personality upgraded to unquestionably heroic. That embarrassing crocodile incident omitted entirely. Future generations treated your legacy like a group project they didn't read the notes for. You were remembered not as you were, but as whatever made the next guy look better. For some pharaohs, the real humiliation came millennia later when archaeologists cracked open their carefully guarded tombs, put their mummies under fluorescent lighting, and shipped their fingernails to museums. That gold sarcophagus you spent your life preparing? Now a display case for elementary school field trips. Your royal toenail clippings? Tagged, cataloged, possibly available as keychains in the gift shop. You ruled empires, were worshipped as a god, and now you're a skeleton in a climate-controlled box while tourists mispronounce your name and wonder if your curses still work. So yes, you were the living embodiment of divine order, the chosen of Ra, Lord of the Two Lands, and your greatest reward is being slightly misrepresented by a travel blogger 3,000 years later. Harold Sigurdsson entered the world in 1015, screaming, we assume, into a kingdom already on fire. Norway was a battleground. His half-brother Olaf Haraldsson was fighting tooth and axe to unify the country under one crown. It wasn't going well. The nobles hated Olaf, the Danes wanted his head, and old pagan traditions were cracking under Christian kingship. Baby Harold was born not into comfort, but into a world of sword points, shifting alliances, and blood feuds. His father, Sigurd Seer, was a minor king, more farmer than warrior, but wealthy and respected. His mother, Asta Gudbrandsdatter, was the political firestarter, ambitious, shrewd, fiercely Christian, and most importantly, mother of Olaf Haraldsson, soon to be Saint Olaf. This made Harold a prince by blood and destiny, a younger brother who'd grow up watching a warrior king try to claw a country into unity. From birth, Harold wasn't treated like a child who might do something important someday. He was trained like a future chess piece in an already bloody game. By 10, he could handle a sword. By 11, ride. By 15, he was riding into actual battle. That was the year Olaf lost his throne to Danish invaders and returned from exile in 1030 to reclaim it. He gathered a ragged army of loyalists and marched to his doom at the Battle of Stiklestad. And guess who rode with him? 15-year-old Harold. No war paint, no glorious armor, just a teenager in chainmail with too much idealism and not enough fear. The battle was a disaster. Olaf was killed. Harold, wounded and likely in shock, fled into the mountains with the shattered remnants of their army. From that moment, Harold would never be a child again. He'd be a fugitive, a survivor, a man shaped by defeat. The Viking prince had entered the stage not in glory, but in blood and retreat. This wasn't the end of Harold's story, just the prologue. After Stiklestad, Harold didn't disappear. He retreated eastward across Scandinavia's snowy spine into the rivers and dark forests of Kievan Rus. To most Norwegians, this meant exile. To Harold, it was a second chance. Kievan Rus was a rising powerhouse, Slavic, Norse, Byzantine influenced, ruled by Yaroslav the Wise, who had a soft spot for well-connected Viking royalty. Even luckier, Yaroslav's court was already packed with Norse mercenaries. Harold fit right in. This wasn't some cushy palace stay. Harold signed up to fight. And fight he did, against raiders, steppe nomads, rebellious princes. He earned his scars and silver, impressing Yaroslav enough to command troops barely a year after arriving. He may have even fallen for one of Yaroslav's daughters. We'll revisit that. The young Viking's reputation grew. Tall, fierce, tactically clever, where most warriors just charged ahead. Under his command, you learned discipline. Against him, you learned regret. By now, Harold had matured into something far more dangerous than a desperate teenage prince. He was an operator, a warlord in exile with no throne, no homeland, no master. But Rus wasn't his endgame. It was the forge shaping the iron. He wanted more. So in the late 1030s, Harold turned southward to Constantinople, the richest city on earth, its walls taller than Norwegian mountains, filled with gold, politics, and endless war. The Byzantine emperor needed soldiers. Harold needed a kingdom. A deal was waiting. So he left Yaroslav's court for Miklagard, the Norse name for Constantinople, joining history's most elite mercenary unit, the Varangian Guard. This wasn't a career move, it was an invasion from within, and Harold was about to become one of their most feared weapons. When Harold reached Constantinople in the early 1040s, he entered a world that made even Rus look provincial. The city gleamed with domes, mosaics, silk, and secrets, the Byzantine Empire's beating heart. Harold wanted a peace. Joining the Varangian Guard, mostly Norse and Anglo-Saxon mercenaries, his job was simple: guard the emperor, fight his wars, and keep a very sharp axe handy for political emergencies. But Harold wasn't just another beard with a sword. He rose fast. His height, cunning, and sheer ferocity turned heads. He didn't just survive Byzantium, he thrived. Over the next decade, Harold Hardrada became a living storm, fighting Arab rebels in Sicily, battling pirates in the Aegean, marching through Anatolia, reaching Jerusalem, where legend says he bathed in the Jordan River, vowing to someday rule his own kingdom. Yet Harold wasn't just swinging a sword, he was studying. Byzantine politics were a viper pit of courtiers, generals, and eunuchs, all stabbing each other with smiles. While Harold couldn't out-scheme the palace elite, he could outlast them, surviving multiple emperor swaps, civil unrest, and shady coups while climbing higher. He also got very, very rich, wore spoils, bribes, gifts, possibly treasure stashed for later. He wore silk, not fur, gold, not bronze. This wasn't the boy who fled Stiklestad. This was a polished warrior with more Byzantine finesse than most Greek courtiers. But Harold would never be content guarding someone else's throne. When the emperor started seeing him as a threat, just another ambitious foreigner with too much gold, Harold decided to leave. Escaping Byzantium required all his nerve, muscle, and Viking stubbornness. After nearly a decade fighting for emperors, he'd now fight for himself. Next stop, home, Norway. This time, he wasn't coming to beg, he was coming to rule. By 1045, Harold Hardrada was done being anyone's hired sword. He returned to Scandinavia, a battle-hardened warlord dripping with Byzantine gold, trailed by exotic mercenaries, and carrying more battlefield experience than most kings could dream of. But Norway wasn't exactly rolling out the welcome mats. The throne already had an occupant, Magnus the Good, the illegitimate son of Harold's half-brother Saint Olaf. Magnus had been holding things together reasonably well, young, popular, having united Norway and Denmark under his rule. What he lacked was Harold's experience, wealth, and most importantly, Harold's bottomless ambition. So Harold did what any self-respecting Viking warlord would do. He hired an army. Using his Byzantine treasure hoard, Harold recruited fighters from across Rus and Sweden. Then he struck a deal with Sven Estridsson, Magnus' rival in Denmark. Harold would help Sven reclaim Denmark, and in return, Sven would help Harold challenge Magnus for Norway. It was a messy medieval bromance built on mutual hatred and longboats. But Harold didn't actually need to invade. Magnus, sensing a bloody civil war brewing, made a shocking offer: share the throne. It was a power-sharing arrangement doomed from the start, like trying to split a crown between a monk and a lion. And Harold wasn't the monk. For 2 years they co-ruled Norway with all the warmth of two scorpions in a jar. Then in 1047, Magnus died suddenly. Some say illness, others whisper poison. Harold didn't waste time mourning. He seized sole control of Norway without blinking, making it crystal clear he was now the undisputed king. But Norway alone couldn't satisfy him. He wanted Denmark too, launching nearly 2 decades of seasonal warfare against Sven Estridsson, raiding coasts, burning towns, and generally behaving like a human hurricane. Yet Denmark stubbornly resisted. No matter how many villages Harold torched, he could never quite hold the land. Sven kept bouncing back like a Nordic whack-a-mole. Still, Norway was his now, and Harold ruled it like a man who'd spent 20 years fighting for the privilege. Taxes rose, central authority tightened, dissenters either bent the knee or vanished. He used his wealth to maintain a standing army and fleet, an unheard-of luxury for Norwegian kings. Churches were built, coins minted, and Norway stopped being a northern backwater, becoming a proper kingdom with very sharp teeth. But Harold's idea of kingship was medieval realpolitik. Loyalty came only after obedience. Peace existed solely on his terms. Local chieftains who challenged him met swords. Protesting peasants met worse. He wasn't a tyrant, just Viking royalty with imperial instincts. The Norwegians didn't know what hit them. Yet Harold wasn't all steel and fire. He wrote poetry, mostly about himself, naturally, supported skalds who immortalized his deeds, and maintained trade routes across Europe. He even reconnected with Byzantine contacts, just in case his treasure stash needed checking. But he never stopped warring with Denmark. Every summer, like clockwork, he'd sail south to remind Sven who was boss, though these campaigns became less about conquest and more about pride. Harold couldn't let go. Sven refused to die. By the early 1060s, Harold started grooming his son Olaf here for succession. He probably expected to rule decades more, retire into legend, maybe die peacefully surrounded by gold and loyal warriors. Then came 1066, the year England exploded into chaos. Edward the Confessor had died without an heir. The throne became a free-for-all, and Harold, gray at the temples but still sharp as a spear, saw his last great chance. He wasn't content with Norway or Denmark anymore. England called. His claim was shaky at best. Through some old deal with Danish king Knut, who'd once ruled England. Did it make legal sense? Not really. But in Viking logic, claim plus army equals throne. So Harold allied with Tostig Godwin's son, the bitter exiled brother of England's new King Harold. Tostig promised local support. Harold promised steel. With around 300 longships and over 10,000 warriors, he sailed across the North Sea just as his Viking ancestors had. Only this wasn't a raid. It was full-scale invasion. Landing near the Humber in September 1066, he advanced toward York. The English weren't ready. At the Battle of Fulford, Harold crushed a hastily assembled northern army. York surrendered. The old Viking magic seemed back. Confident, Harold camped at Stamford Bridge, demanding regional hostages. Then came the surprise. King Harold Godwin's son had force-marched his army north from London in under a week, catching the Norwegians completely unprepared. Many of Harold's men had left their armor behind, expecting negotiations, not battle. What followed was brutal. The Vikings fought fiercely but were outmaneuvered and outnumbered. One berserker reportedly held the bridge alone, buying time, but even Viking courage had limits. In the chaos, Harold took an arrow to the throat. The last great Viking king fell mid-swing, his sword still in hand. Reinforcements arrived too late under Eystein, or Harold's standard-bearer, only to find the field littered with corpses. Eystein died in what became known as Orr's Storm, a doomed counterattack ending in more Norse blood soaking English soil. Of Harold's 300 ships, only 24 were needed to carry survivors home. The message was clear. The Viking Age had ended with Harold's death at Stamford Bridge on September 25, 1066. But the impact rippled further. Harold Godwin's son barely had time to celebrate before word came. William of Normandy had landed in the south. Had Hardrada not attacked when he did, Harold might have prepared better. Instead, just 3 weeks after crushing one invader, he faced another at Hastings on October 14th. There, he fell to the Normans, making Hardrada's failed invasion the unwitting prelude to William's success. Back in Norway, news hit like winter. The once invincible Harold, hero of Rus, scourge of Byzantium, was gone. His son Olaf Kir took over, but Olaf wasn't his father. He preferred trade to raids, stability to conquest. Under him, Viking fire cooled into politics and Christianity. The longships remained, but as commerce tools, not weapons. No more berserkers charging monasteries. No more kings dreaming of silver and conquest. The sagas would still be sung, but their subjects were now ghosts. Harold's life was the Viking world's final epic, from snowy Norway to Constantinople's golden domes, from steppe skirmishes to English meadows. He embodied everything the Viking Age stood for: bravery, ambition, ruthlessness, and above all, motion. After Stamford Bridge, that motion stopped. The Norse world turned inward. The Viking Age had ended. The medieval world had begun. Harold Hardrada's death marked the Viking Age's close, but his legacy was too colossal to bury. Centuries later, his story echoes through sagas, ballads, and history books like a war horn across fjords. He wasn't just a king. He was a dying era's symbol, Viking ambition at its wildest, proof of what happens when a man refuses to fade quietly into history. Historians still debate how to define him. Conqueror? Poet? Cold-blooded killer? The truth lies somewhere between. He composed verse, yet ordered villages burned, built churches, yet left fields blood-soaked from Sicily to Stamford Bridge. He was both brute and bard, builder and destroyer. But none question his greatness. No other Viking traveled farther, fought in more wars, or amassed more wealth and renown. He served emperors, defied kings, bent armies to his will. While most Norse leaders faded into legend with a few sagas and a cairn, Harold carved his name into 3 empires. His poetry survives. His name appears in the Heimskringla and Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. His exploits still challenge filmmakers and scholars to explain how one man packed 3 lifetimes into 50 years. Even his nickname, Hardrada, hard ruler, wasn't an insult but a warning. Harold didn't bend. He ruled as he fought, with fire in his veins and steel in his hand. After his death, Norway changed. Olaf Kyrre ushered in peace and prosperity. Trade blossomed, swords were sheathed. The Viking era became memory. But Harold remained larger than life, a Norwegian icon, Icelandic saga subject, English cautionary tale, Byzantine legend. He was the last Viking king, dying as he lived, sword in hand, chasing a crown. When the longships stopped sailing and mead halls quieted, the world turned. But Harold Hardrada had ensured history would remember his name. To Vikings, a ship wasn't just wood and sail. It was identity, legacy, destiny. How you traded, raided, traveled, and passed on. So when warriors died, burying them in ships wasn't ceremonial, it was essential. In Viking belief, ships bridged the living and dead. Just as warriors sailed seas to conquer lands alive, they'd sail metaphysical seas to reach the afterlife. This wasn't quaint superstition, but cosmic law. Life was a voyage, death the next leg. That's why ship burials were so elaborate. The vessel had to be worthy. Longships up to 70 feet with dragon-headed prows built to cut through waves and spiritual dimensions. The body lay centered on furs, surrounded by gear. Weapons, swords, axes, shields, for afterlife battles, plus tools, jewelry, even sacrificed slaves, horses or hawks to serve beyond death. To us, this seems brutal. To Vikings, honorable. The ship was then buried under earth mounds. Not just tombs, but power statements. Here lies someone important enough to deserve passage to the next world. And not just men. Some most magnificent ship burials, like Oseberg, belong to women, queens, priestesses, aristocrats also sent to the afterlife in style, proving spiritual passage wasn't gender exclusive. So when we say Vikings lived and died by the sea, we mean literally. Ships weren't just how they conquered lands, but how they conquered death. If Viking ship burials sound mythical, the Oseberg and Gokstad discoveries turned legend to fact. These weren't dusty graves, but time capsules. Fully intact ships pulled from Norwegian soil, packed with splendor and secrets. The Oseberg ship, unearthed in 1904 near a burial mound, was a 70-foot masterpiece with serpentine curves and intricate carvings, a royal hearse for someone extraordinary. But the twist? It held 2 women, one likely noble/royal, another possibly a servant or high priestess. The older woman, maybe a queen or vulva seeress, was draped in silk, surrounded by carved sledges, chests, even a cart with cathedral-worthy wheels. 2 sacrificed oxen lay at the prow. This wasn't a funeral, but a cosmic launch party. Then there's the Gokstad ship, 1880. Sleek, armed for war, holding a man's skeleton, likely a chieftain, with shields, beds, gaming pieces, and remains of 12 horses, 6 dogs, and 2 peacocks. Yes, peacocks. These graves reveal more than wealth. They expose beliefs. Oseberg spoke of female power and ritual, Gokstad of prestige and global trade. Both showed Vikings tying death to travel. The next world wasn't waited for, but sailed to. These weren't ordinary graves, but declarations, echoes of power, floating temples buried in earth. And they were just the beginning. Viking funerals weren't somber goodbyes, but spectacles, theatrical rites launching the dead onward while ensuring the living never forgot them. Ship burials were main events, starting with washed, dressed bodies posed ceremonially, sometimes seated upright as if sleeping, holding weapons or treasures. Then came the rituals, some chilling. Arab traveler Ibn Fadlan described Rus' Viking funerals where a slave girl volunteered, or was chosen, to join her chieftain in death. For days she was treated royally before being sacrificed at the funeral, strangled and stabbed amid chants, drums, and alcohol-fueled ecstasy. Animals weren't spared either. Horses slaughtered to carry souls, dogs and hawks offered as companions. Sometimes boats were surrounded by stone circles, symbolizing world boundaries. Some ships were burned, set ablaze, and pushed to sea in flaming farewells lighting the night. Others were buried in pits, covered with mounds. The choice depended on status, location, practicality. Burning longships wasn't cheap. These funerals weren't just religious, they were political theater. Massive burials declared, "This death shook the earth. This journey to the gods deserves thunder." Thanks to Hollywood, most people picture Viking funerals the same way. A blazing longship drifting out to sea, flames licking the sky while stoic warriors watch from shore. It's cinematic, dramatic, and almost entirely fictional. So what's the truth? Ship burials, not burnings, were far more common in the archaeological record. Burial mounds like Oseberg, Gokstad, and Thun reveal longships carefully placed in the ground, loaded with grave goods, and covered with soil or stones. These weren't one-size-fits-all. Some were extravagant, others modest. But the key was preservation. The ship wasn't destroyed, it became a tomb. So where does the fiery imagery come from? Mostly from literary sources like Icelandic sagas and foreign accounts. Arab diplomat Ibn Fadlan famously described a Rus chieftain's ship set ablaze with his body and sacrificed servants inside. But even that example is murky. It might have been a symbolic structure, not a full ship. Burning ships did happen, especially where burial wasn't practical or where fire held deep symbolism. A cremation at sea made sense if land was scarce or if the deceased was meant to join the gods dramatically. But archaeologically, burned ship remains are vanishingly rare. The truth? The idea of a burning ship mattered as much as the act. Fire purified. It transformed. A flaming vessel wasn't just spectacle, it was a spiritual engine, carrying the soul through smoke to the gods. Yet burial had advantages. It preserved legacy. A mound was a physical monument, a memory carved into earth. And in a society obsessed with honor and lineage, that permanence mattered. So which was real? Both, in different times, places, and contexts. But buried ships left bones for history. The flaming ones? Only legend and ash. Forget stereotypes of Viking women waiting meekly at home. In death, as in life, Norse women commanded awe, fear, and ceremony. Nowhere is this clearer than in ship burials, where some women's graves rivaled or surpassed men's in grandeur. The Oseberg burial remains the crown jewel. Unearthed in 1904, it held 2 women, one elderly, likely noble or royal, the other younger, possibly a servant or priestess. The ship itself was a masterpiece, 70 feet of carved serpentine curves, its prow rising like a dragon's head. This wasn't a warship, but a floating palace for the dead. The older woman, possibly a queen or vulva, seeress, was buried amid staggering wealth. Ornate sledges, a cart with wheel spokes like cathedral windows, tapestries, and even a bucket shaped like a Viking's idea of modern art. 2 sacrificed oxen lay at the prow, their bones whispering of a send-off fit for gods. But it's the ritual objects that intrigue most. Wands, staffs, and animal remains hinting at magic. If this woman was a vulva, her burial honored not just political power, but spiritual authority. In Norse society, that could eclipse swords. Other graves echo this pattern. The Gazel Queen, buried near Stavanger, rested with gold jewelry, imported bronze vessels, and fine riding gear, her grave radiating status. The Ladby ship in Denmark held high-status female remains, while DNA evidence from Birka, Sweden, confirmed a warrior grave with a full arsenal belonged biologically to a woman. These finds shatter assumptions. Viking women could hold power, aristocrats, queens, priestesses, even shield maidens. They weren't just accessories in death, they were centered in it. They didn't accompany kings to the afterlife. Sometimes they were the kings. When a Viking was buried in a ship, they didn't travel light. The grave goods, carefully curated for the afterlife, offer a bizarre, fascinating window into their world. Forget just swords and silver. These ships were packed like time capsules. Weapons were standard, of course. Swords with jeweled hilts, spears, shields, axes, not just for ghostly battles, but as status symbols. Some blades were ritually killed, bent, or broken, to release their essence for the journey. But it's the everyday items that humanize them. Combs, because even the dead might need grooming. Cooking pots, afterlife meals, and gaming pieces, nefatiful boards for eternity's long nights. One grave held a folding stool, medieval multitasking at its finest. Then there were the animals. The Gokstad burial included 12 horses, 6 dogs, and 2 peacocks, likely exotic gifts. Horses carried souls, dogs offered loyalty, peacocks, pure prestige, the Viking equivalent of being buried with a Rolex. Most unsettling, the people, slaves, servants, or companions sacrificed to accompany their masters. Whether voluntary or forced, their presence screams of a culture where duty outlasted death. Every object told a story. This person was a warrior. That one loved fine textiles. Another hoarded Arabic coins. Grave goods weren't junk. They were final biographies written in gold, iron, and bone. And once packed, the ship became a floating home beneath the earth. While Norway's Oseberg and Gokstad ships dominate Viking burial lore, ship graves weren't confined to Scandinavia. From icy fjords to Russian riverbanks, these practices took unique regional flavors. Norway's ship burials were monumental, literally. The Oseberg and Gokstad mounds were meant to dominate landscapes, their ships carved with mythic imagery. This wasn't subtlety. It was a billboard screaming, "Someone important rests here." Sweden preferred symbolism. At sites like Vendel and Valsgard, ships weren't always buried whole. Instead, stones outlined their shapes like skeletal frames, a ghostly fleet marking cremation graves. These ship settings often clustered in groups, suggesting family plots or warrior brotherhoods. In Denmark, marshy soils devoured wood, leaving fewer intact ships. But stone ship settings, like those at Jelling, hint at similar traditions. Even humble graves sometimes included tiny boat models, proving the idea transcended class. The Rus Vikings, Norse settlers in modern Russia/Ukraine, took it further. Ibn Fadlan's account describes a chieftain's funeral where a ship was dragged ashore, propped with logs, and burned with the body and sacrifices inside. Archaeology supports this. Charred remains at sites like Ladoga show ship cremations did occur, albeit rarely. Britain and the Baltic saw hybrid practices. The Snape ship burial in England blended Norse and Anglo-Saxon elements, while Estonian ship graves contained both local and Scandinavian goods. Even Iceland, where wood was scarce, had boat-shaped stone graves. Wherever Vikings sailed, their belief in ships as spiritual vessels followed. The forms adapted, burned or buried, whole or symbolic, but the core idea endured. Death wasn't an end, but a voyage, and no one should sail unprepared. For Vikings, death wasn't the end, but a departure, and that's why ship burials resonate. They weren't just about honoring the dead with pyrotechnics. They sprang from a profound belief that the afterlife was a journey, and the soul needed a vessel. Norse cosmology was shaped by water. The world's serpent Jormungandr circled Midgard. The river Joel separated living from dead. Even Valhalla lay reached by crossing icy streams. Life came from the sea, so too would death. It's no accident that ships star in Viking myths. Naglfar, the doomed ship made of dead men's nails, sails at Ragnarok to unleash chaos. Skblanir, Freyr's magical ship, folds into a pocket, yet always finds wind. These weren't just stories, they informed burial rites. Every buried longship echoed legend, turning myth into ritual. To be buried in a ship meant you were going somewhere. Valhall for warriors, Folkvanger for those favored by Freya, or, for oath breakers, the icy misery of Nastrin. But you wouldn't walk, you'd sail. This belief trickled down. Even poor Vikings got boat-shaped graves, stones arranged in ship forms, or tiny model vessels tucked into children's graves. The message was universal. The next world wasn't a static place, but a destination, and the trip required the right transport. Ship burials were cosmic travel kits. By placing the dead amid weapons, animals, and treasure, Vikings weren't just stocking tombs. They were equipping travelers for the ultimate trip. And for the living, the ship wasn't goodbye. It was bond voyage. A millennium has passed since the last Viking ship burial vanished into Earth, but their legacy sails on. These vessels of death, once silent in mounds, now speak through museums, excavations, and pop culture's imagination. Today, the Oseberg and Gokstad ships rest in Oslo's Viking Ship Museum, their serpentine prows still radiating power. Tourists gawk, children sketch them, and scholars debate their every nail. These ships were never meant to sail again, yet they have, across centuries, not waves. Hollywood keeps the myth aflame. From the 13th Warrior to How to Train Your Dragon, flaming longship funerals remain iconic. Historically accurate? Rarely. But the spirit survives. Death as voyage, the ship as both coffin and freedom. Modern Scandinavia still feels these echoes. Some request ship-themed funerals, ashes scattered at sea, or ceremonies modeled on old rites, minus the human sacrifices. Experimental archaeologists have even rebuilt burial ships, testing their seaworthiness. What's remarkable is how much we've learned. Shipwood reveals lost forests. Construction techniques show engineering rivaling Rome's. Grave goods, from Arabian silver to Baltic amber, map Viking trade routes spanning continents. The Viking ship burial wasn't just interment. It was a final performance, one last saga in a life of raids, poetry, and power. And now, these silent ships still perform, reminding us that the dead were once alive, that myths outlast empires, and that some vessels never truly dock. They just sail on, through time. Courtly love wasn't about marriage, kids, or domestic bliss. It was about longing, the exquisite torture of desire kept just out of reach. By the 12th century, this concept had infected European nobility like a fever, complete with its own unwritten rulebook. Part seduction manual, part philosophical puzzle, and entirely divorced from reality. Born in Aquitaine's sun-drenched courts, courtly love, Finamore in Occitan, was less about genuine emotion than performance. Noblemen, often knights, would pledge devotion to a lady, usually of higher status or already married. But here's the twist. The goal wasn't seduction. It was worship from afar. Poems would be composed, quests undertaken, hearts would break artistically. If this sounds like emotional BDSM dressed in silk, well, it was. The rules were clear. Love must be secret, whispered sonnets, not public canoodling. Love must be difficult. She's married to your liege lord? Perfect. Love must remain unconsummated, because fulfillment kills the magic. In this game, suffering was the point. A knight's heartbreak proved his devotion. The more hopeless the love, the nobler his spirit. This wasn't romance. It was competitive melancholy. The troubadours were courtly love's hype men, wandering from castle to castle with lyres and lyrics dripping with unrequited passion. These poet-musicians transformed longing into an art form, spinning tales of knights pining for unattainable ladies with all the subtlety of a hormonal teenager writing bad poetry. Their ballads followed a strict formula. The lady is perfect, flawless beauty, impossible virtue. The lover is wretched, suffering beautifully, probably sighing a lot. The situation is hopeless. She's married / his liege's wife / a literal saint. This wasn't romance. It was emotional self-flagellation set to music, but it caught on like wildfire across Europe's noble courts, creating a bizarre cultural moment where the aristocracy competed to see who could be the most dramatically miserable in love. The church hated it. Here was a movement glorifying extramarital yearning, even if technically chaste, that threatened their monopoly on moral instruction. Worse, courtly love often placed women on pedestals, a radical notion in medieval patriarchy. The clergy grumbled about frivolous passions corrupting good Christian souls, but nobles kept right on sighing over their liege lords' wives anyway. Courtly love's legacy lingers in modern romance tropes. The tortured artist, the unattainable crush, the idea that true love must be difficult. We've inherited the troubadour's belief that suffering proves devotion, that obstacles make love purer. It's why rom-coms thrive on, while they slash won't they tension and pop songs wallow in heartbreak. The medieval aristocracy would be proud. Meanwhile, back in reality, actual medieval marriages were about as romantic as a tax audit. Noble unions were political contracts, business deals with dowries and treaties attached. Love? Optional at best, inconvenient at worst. A lord marrying for passion rather than power risked looking weak, or worse, stupid. This created cognitive dissonance. The same knight composing sonnets about his liege's lady might ride home to a wife he'd barely spoken to since their arranged wedding. The disconnect between courtly fantasy and marital reality was staggering, like watching soap operas while doing your taxes. Some historians argue courtly love arose because marriages were so coldly practical. The aristocracy needed an outlet for emotions forbidden in their unions. Others see it as social theater, a way to practice refined manners and verbal sparring. Either way, it was a game with strict rules. Never consummate the love, that would make it vulgar. Publicly deny any attachment while dropping obvious hints. Suffer beautifully, paleness, sighing, composing bad poetry. The most famous courtly love story, Lancelot and Guinevere, the ultimate forbidden love tale where Arthur's greatest knight falls for his queen. Medieval audiences ate it up, ignoring how this romance literally destroyed Camelot. Priorities. Eleanor of Aquitaine wasn't just a queen. She was courtly love's patron saint and chief disruptor. As Duchess of Aquitaine, and later Queen of France then England, her court became the movement's ground zero, hosting troubadours, love debates, and enough romantic tension to power 1,000 fanfics. But Eleanor was no passive muse. She weaponized courtly love's ideals to wield soft power, positioning herself as the ultimate unattainable lady while quietly influencing politics. When her first husband, Louis VII of France, proved too pious for her tastes, she allegedly used lack of passion as grounds for annulment, a bold move in an era when women were property. Her second marriage to Henry II of England was fire and fury, passionate, turbulent, and ultimately explosive. When Henry imprisoned her for supporting their son's rebellion, she became the ultimate courtly love icon, the suffering queen, wronged by her lord. Poets wept, songs were written. Eleanor, ever the strategist, leaned into the image. Her daughter Marie de Champagne took the torch, presiding over love courts where nobles debated questions like, can true love exist between spouses? Consensus, no, too boring. Should a lover obey his lady's every command? Obviously. Is a peasant capable of noble love? Laughter, then no. These weren't frivolous debates, but social experiments testing power dynamics. By making noble women love's arbiters, courtly love temporarily flipped the script on medieval gender roles, even if only in poetry. Chivalry wasn't born on battlefields, but in ballads. The perfect knight, brave, courteous, devout, emerged from courtly love's fever dream, merging martial prowess with romantic suffering. Suddenly, hacking through infidels wasn't enough. A proper warrior also needed to sigh over his lady's sleeve while quoting bad poetry. This created the knightly ideal we know today, part warrior, part wandering minstrel, entirely ridiculous. The church approved of the defend the weak bits but rolled its eyes at the lovelorn nonsense. Meanwhile, actual knights probably split into two camps. The romantics grew up on troubadour songs, joust for their lady's favor, might faint if she smiles. The realists, I'm here to kill people and inherit land, not write sonnets. Tournaments became courtly love's stage. Knights wore their ladies' colors, fought in their honor, and generally pretended this wasn't just violent cosplay. The love was usually one-sided. Noble women watched from stands, vaguely amused, while men bled in the dirt below. Chivalry's legacy is a mixed bag. It gave us noble protector tropes, but also unrealistic expectations. Modern nice guys owe their angst to medieval knights who thought suffering proved worth. The difference? At least Lancelot had sword skills. For all its flowery language, courtly love was about power. Who held it? Who pretended not to? And how desire could be weaponized. Noble women gained temporary influence as love's judges, but the game was rigged. She must be beautiful, or she's not worth the effort. She must be unattainable, or the game ends. She must remain passive, no actual agency. Thanks. Meanwhile, men's suffering was performative. A knight might die of love in poems, but in reality, he'd shrug and marry for land next week. The lady? Stuck on her pedestal, unable to step down without ruining the fantasy. Courtly love's contradictions collapsed under their own weight. By the Renaissance, the movement faded as humanists prioritized mutual affection over tortured yearning. But its DNA lingers everywhere, from rom-com miscommunication tropes to incel rhetoric about deserving love. The takeaway? Medieval Europe invented performative angst, turned it into high art, and we've been dealing with the fallout ever since. Thanks, troubadours. While nobles played emotional chess, medieval peasants were too busy surviving to romanticize starvation. Courtly love was a luxury, like indoor plumbing or not dying of plague. For the lower classes, marriage was teamwork. You farm, I weave. Maybe we don't starve this winter. That's not to say peasants didn't love. Folk songs overflow with earthy passion. Less, I sigh for my liege's wife. And more, your eyes shine like fresh cheese. Practical? Yes. Less dramatic? Absolutely. But when your life is backbreaking labor, who has energy for performative melancholy? The church struggled to impose marital ideals on peasants who mostly ignored them. Clergy preached chastity. Villagers kept hand-fasting, trial marriages. Bishops forbade divorce. Communities found ways around it. Courtly love's rules didn't trickle down because survival had its own priorities. Ironically, while nobles fantasized about forbidden love, peasants occasionally experienced the real thing, marrying for affection because no one cared enough to arrange their unions. The ultimate twist? History's most romantic era might have hidden its truest love stories not in castles, but in cottages. Fast forward 8 centuries, and courtly love's ghost haunts every dating app. The rules have changed, but the game remains. The unattainable crush your Tinder match who ghosts after one message. Suffering as proof of love, if he wanted to. He would memes. Public performance Instagram couples staging candid moments. We've replaced troubadours with pop stars, sonnets with Spotify playlists, and jousting with, well, Twitter fights. The pedestal remains, though now it's built from likes and follower counts. Even modern romance's toxicity echoes courtly love. Nice guys mirror knights who thought suffering entitled them to love. Friend zones recall ladies trapped on pedestals. And the belief that real love must be hard. That's pure 12th century baggage. Perhaps courtly love's greatest trick was convincing us that yearning is nobler than contentment. 800 years later, we're still unpacking that lie. The medieval world birthed 2 competing visions of love, one celestial, one carnal. The church preached that earthly love was sinful, a distraction from divine devotion. Courtly love countered that romantic yearning could be spiritual, if kept unconsummated. This tension shaped centuries of art and literature. Dante's Divine Comedy framed love as a ladder to God, with Beatrice as his celestial guide. Meanwhile, Boccaccio's Decameron reveled in lusty tales of monks and maidens. The message? Love could damn or save you, depending on how you channeled it. Courtly love's legacy isn't just in romance, but in how we view passion itself. The medieval world feared desires chaos. We've inherited both their awe and anxiety. Every love versus lust debate, every rom-com about emotional walls, every song about wanting what you can't have, these are courtly love's grandchildren. So the next time you sigh over a crush who doesn't text back, remember, you're reenacting a drama invented by 12th century French nobles with too much time and not enough indoor heating. Some traditions never die. The troubadours' melodies still echo through modern romance, but their true legacy lies in how they weaponized poetry as social currency. These poet-musicians didn't just sing about love. They crafted an entire economy of desire where verses functioned as both diplomatic tools and psychological warfare. A skilled troubadour could elevate a lady's status with carefully placed metaphors. Your eyes outshine the virgin's halo. Destroy a rival's reputation through backhanded compliments. His love burns bright, like a tavern whore's candle. Secure political favors by praising the right patron's daughter. Countess Eleanor's virtue makes the moon blush. This wasn't entertainment. It was soft power with lute accompaniment. The best troubadours operated like medieval PR firms, spinning scandals into sonnets and rebellions into romances. When Duke William IX of Aquitaine, the first known troubadour, was excommunicated for seducing a viscount's wife, he simply composed a ballad boasting about it, turning disgrace into celebrity. The church fought back with theological counter-programming. Clerics rewrote the Virgin Mary as the ultimate unattainable lady, merging courtly love with Marian devotion. Suddenly, pious knights could channel their yearnings toward heavenly targets. My soul thirsts for Christ's bride. It was a masterstroke, redirecting erotic energy into religious fervor while keeping the poetic structures troubadours invented. Meanwhile, real noble women navigated this minefield with varying success. Some, like Eleanor of Aquitaine, leveraged courtly love's tropes to wield influence while maintaining plausible deniability. Others became collateral damage in lyric warfare, like the Countess of Gia, whose reputation was shredded by a jilted troubadour's verses accusing her of cruelty, medieval code for sexual rejection. By the 13th century, the movement's contradictions imploded. The Albigensian Crusade crushed Occitan culture, and new poetic forms emerged. But courtly love's DNA had already mutated into European consciousness, resurfacing everywhere from Dante's Beatrice to Shakespeare's sonnets to today's pop lyrics about toxic relationships. Modern parallels abound. Influencers equals troubadours trading flattery for patronage. Cancel culture equals medieval reputation destruction via viral ballads. Simps equals knights who confused suffering with virtue. The takeaway? Humanity never stopped performing love. We just swapped lutes for Instagram. What began as aristocratic gamesmanship became the blueprint for how we romanticize dysfunction. The troubadours would be proud. The medieval world had a secret. Courtly love was never about love. It was about power. Who held it, who pretended not to, and how desire could be twisted into control. Beneath the flowery poetry and chivalric sighs lay a brutal social experiment testing how far nobility would go to romanticize their own oppression. Consider the rules of this game. The lady must be higher status, ensuring her suitor's devotion doubled as political submission. The love must remain unconsummated, freezing desire into perpetual negotiation. The lover must suffer publicly, transforming emotional pain into social currency. This wasn't romance. It was emotional feudalism, with women as both prizes and prison guards in a system that gave them symbolic authority while denying real agency. The lady on her pedestal wasn't free. She was trapped in gilded performance, her every smile or frown scrutinized for political meaning. The psychological toll was staggering. Historical records hint at noble women driven to illness by the pressure of maintaining these delicate fictions. The 12th century Chronicle of Melrose describes a Scottish countess who took religious vows after being wearied by the sighs of lovers, a telling euphemism for what we'd now call harassment. Meanwhile, knights literally made themselves sick with self-inflicted starvation and sleep deprivation to prove their purity of heart. Modern psychology would diagnose this as collective masochism, but medieval Europe called it virtue. The entire system functioned like an aristocratic BDSM club without safe words, where submission was rebranded as devotion. Obsession became spiritual discipline. Emotional manipulation was an art form. The Church's eventual co-option of these tropes reveals the darkest irony. When theologians began framing Christ as the ultimate unattainable beloved and monks as his yearning brides, they didn't eliminate courtly love, they sanctified its pathologies. Now the self-flagellation wasn't metaphorical, and the impossible standards were divine. This spiritualized version birthed new horrors. Mystics like Marguerite Porete were burned at the stake for taking the metaphor too literally. Her Mirror of Simple Souls argued that true love of God required annihilating one's will completely. The message was clear: actual surrender was heresy, performative suffering remained piety. The legacy lives on in toxic relationship patterns we still can't shake. If he wanted to, he would medieval tests of devotion, love-bombing troubadour lyric escalation, gaslighting about standards, courtly love's moving goalposts. We've inherited the framework without the fancy poetry. At least the troubadours gave their emotional hostages decent rhyme schemes. The grand irony of courtly love is that its most enduring legacy isn't romance. It's the art of performative suffering. What began as aristocratic gamesmanship metastasized into the Western psyche, teaching generations that love must hurt to be real. We've spent 8 centuries dressing emotional self-harm in increasingly elaborate costumes, from sonnets to rom-coms to dating app algorithms. Consider the evidence. Modern hard-to-get tactics equals recycled troubadour playbooks. Friend zone rhetoric equals knights' complaints about cruel ladies. Celebrity worship equals secularized saintly adoration. The medieval aristocracy would smirk at our Tinder struggles. They invented the rulebook we're still failing to rewrite. But courtly love's darkest bequest is its glorification of imbalance. By codifying love as unequal pursuit, one party perpetually yearning, the other perpetually withholding, it normalized dysfunction as passion. Today's toxic relationships often follow the same script. If he's not suffering for you, does he really love you? She plays hard to get because you're not trying hard enough. These aren't modern ideas. They're 12th century French poetry with better marketing. Even feminism hasn't fully escaped the trap. The independent woman who needs no man archetype simply inverts the courtly dynamic without dismantling it. She's still on the pedestal, just a taller one now. Meanwhile, modern simp culture recreates the knights groveling with crypto donations instead of sonnets. The solution isn't rejecting romance, but exposing its hidden architectures. When we recognize how chivalry pathologized equality, true partners don't need hierarchies. How troubadours monetized longing, love shouldn't be a subscription service. How the church sanctified dissatisfaction, joy is not a spiritual failing. We can finally build relationships on healthier blueprints. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. 800 years after Eleanor of Aquitaine's court, we're still singing the same love songs with auto-tune. Perhaps the real rebellion isn't swiping left or right, but deleting the app entirely and daring to imagine affection without performance. As for the troubadours, they'd be thrilled. The greatest trick courtly love ever pulled was convincing the world this pain was beautiful. And we're still buying the album.